Modest Mouse.
Aggro. 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 Your skill has increased. Aggro.
Good morning. A new federal report says climate disasters are causing $150 billion damage a year and hurting the mental and physical health of Americans. But who's bearing most of that cost? It's Morning Edition from NPR News.
Oh, they are?
Plus, we hear from an Israeli military veteran sounding the alarm about a spike in settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. I'm Martinez.
And I'm Layla Faldin. He says it's time for more than condemnations. David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, has a new job. And it's Tuesday, November 14th. Today, in 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges became the first black child to desegregate her school in New Orleans. On her first day, she was escorted by 4 federal marshals in the face of angry white moms. The news is next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. The Israeli military says its troops have entered the largest hospital in Gaza, where it says members of Hamas are operating and being targeted in a section of the building. As NPR's Lauren Freyer reports, doctors, medical staff, and patients are trapped inside that hospital.
Israel's military says it's carrying out a precise and targeted operation in a specific area of the Al-Shifa hospital complex. It called on any Hamas fighters inside to surrender.
Okay.
In a crowded hospital, the head of its burn unit tells us. Hospital, the head of it's told to move away from the windows. They're panic-stricken, he says. Israel accuses Hamas of basing fighters in.
Did my shit crash? No. Well, that's good.
Intelligence suggests the same. Meanwhile, after the United Nations said its fuel depot in Gaza is now empty and that many more people would die as a result, Israeli defense officials now say they will allow fuel into Gaza for the first time since October 7th. They say it's in response to a request from the U.S. Lauren Freyer, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
President Biden is scheduled to meet with China's President Xi Jinping today in Northern California. It'll be their first face-to-face meeting in a year in an effort to stabilize relations between Washington and Beijing. Trade and human rights are expected to be among the issues discussed. Biden and Xi will be meeting on the sidelines of a summit of Asian-Pacific leaders being held in San Francisco. Tensions between the U.S. and China were heightened earlier this year after a Chinese spy balloon entered U.S. airspace and spent days moving across the country before it was shot down by the military off the coast of South Carolina. The Court of Appeals in New York is scheduled to hear arguments today in a case that could affect the balance of power in Congress. John Campbell with member station WNYC reports.
Republicans picked up 3 House seats in New York in last year's elections. Now, Democrats are asking the state Court of Appeals to order a new congressional map. Former Congressman John Faso is leading the GOP's redistricting efforts in New York.
Everyone should see this for what it is. It's a blatant exercise of raw political power.
Democrats say a bipartisan state panel should get a new chance to draw the lines after it deadlocked last year. This is the latest redistricting lawsuit to work its way through the courts. Earlier this year, Republicans won a new congressional map in North Carolina. For NPR News, I'm John Campbell in Albany.
Wall Street is coming off a day of sharp gains following the latest data on inflation in the U.S. economy. The Labor Department reported consumer prices rose 3.2% in October compared to the same month 1 year ago. That's the smallest annual gain in more than 2 years. The latest numbers make it less likely the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates at next month's policy meeting. This is NPR News. Congress is a step closer to averting a partial shutdown of the federal government. The House has passed legislation to fund the government through early next year. The vote was 336 to 95. The measure keeps some government offices open through mid-January and others through the beginning of February. Democratic lawmakers joined Republicans to pass the spending proposal. The Senate is expected to pass the legislation before the end of the week. The White House says President Biden will sign it into law if the measure clears Congress as expected. A new report says climate change, coupled with the world's continued reliance on fossil fuels, is costing people their health and, in some cases, their lives. NPR's Alejandra Barunda reports on the findings from the medical journal The Lancet.
Every year, the International Lancet Countdown Report takes stock of how climate change affects people's health. The newest edition says record heat, climate fuel disasters, and record high investment in fossil fuels are causing major health problems around the world. Renee Salas is a report author and a doctor at Boston's Mass General Hospital. She has a patient with uncontrollable asthma who lives near polluted freeways. Salas says it's not enough just to prescribe her an inhaler.
The treatment that my patients desperately need is a just transition away from fossil fuels.
The costs and risks are rising fastest in countries that have contributed the least to the problem.
Feel free to browse.
The report calls for an immediate wind down to fossil fuel use globally. Alejandra Barunda, NPR News.
Now futures are up 57 points. I'm Dave Mattingly, NPR News in Washington.
Light your path.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. Fisher Investments' team of specialists tailor portfolios to each client's long-term goals. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investments in securities involve the risk of loss.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Leila Fadel in Washington, D.C.
Jaime Martinez in Los Angeles, California. The Supreme Court has adopted its first code of ethics. All 9 Supreme Court justices signed on to the self-imposed code 7 months after the public learned that 2 justices had accepted lavish gifts from Republican donors. But compliance with the code is essentially voluntary. It doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. So, is it enough to regain the public's trust? Amanda Frost has been following this. She's a law professor at the University of Virginia who testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Supreme Court ethics. So, Professor, considering it's all voluntary, does this change anything for the...
Gonna take skinning and enchanting with this character. And use all the greens that I get, disenchant all the greens I get to enchant my armor with stuff. I think that'd be fun. So I had to run to the Skinner. I won't need the enchanter for a while.
Ishno del Diab.
I mean, I suppose I could take herbalism again, but
Farewell.
it doesn't fit the play style of moving from camp to camp, but enchanting does. Enchanting and skinning. Okay, we'll see if this gets raided in the time that I sleep. If it doesn't, I'll keep building it. If it does, yeah. Oh well. Wow, it's unlisted. Why? Why do you do this stupid shit? Why is this unlisted? You fucking dumb piece of shit. I gotta watch. There's always something that it fails at incredibly bad. Oh, the easiest way really is to grind, although it's terribly boring and it can make you hate playing WoW. I have to admit that find grinding the fastest way to level for me, that is. There are other routes you can take, right? Rogue is easy to medium, okay. That's cool. Oh god, that's fall damage, isn't it? I don't know, that won't kill me though. These are 2 levels higher, are they? No, I don't know. They're okay.
Aggro.
Oh, I didn't go to the trainer. That's probably really bad, actually. I think I have evasion now. Yeah, he was good XP, but I forgot to go to the trainer. Oh, are you going to aggro?
Aggro.
Oh, yeah, you did. Oh, well. my potions all set for grinding and stuff. But before I can start grinding, yeah, herbalism's good when you're questing, but not when you're grinding. Grinding would be disenchanting. I'd be so happy if I could give myself certain ones like agility, anything agility. So good. This is the style. I'm gonna grind to 60. I was good on the horde character until I got drunk and killed her. Like honestly, I should have just kept grinding. I probably would have been fine. I like horde rogue because they flip into the air are all cool. They backflip into the air. So I'm gonna go horde rogue, horde undead rogue for Season of Discovery.
What brings you here? Del Nagi.
The trainer.
Can I assist you?
Yes, backstab and pickpocket. Cool.
Asha Fela.
Backstab. Oh, are you killing me? Not really. No, I'll win. Oops.
How may I help? Goddess watch over you. My goods are of the highest quality. Be careful.
Bag of fruit seeds. Not bad. Gonna sit down. Where am I now? I'm out there. That's pretty good. Let's go watch a video while I eat real quick. 2 a.m. Time for the only meal of the day. Oh yeah, Overwatch League dies plus. Okay, cool. This is good.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Start learning
Hells
about
yeah.
science, math, engineering, computer science, and so much more thanks to Brilliant's accessible and interactive courses. Click below to try it for free, or be among the first 200 to sign up and get a 20% discount on an annual subscription. More details after the video. Okay, so by now some of you will have heard about a situation involving Gerard, aka the Completionist, and his management of charity funds that he's collected over a 10-year period. There's no allegation that he pocketed the money, but it's also clear that none of that money has yet been paid out to any charity, an amount circa $650,000. So there's a lot of detail in this, and rather than recount it here, I'm going to leave links to the videos by Carl Jobst and Mutahar below. That's not me wholesale endorsing the content of those videos or prejudging the situation one way or the other, but it is to say that those videos are out there, these allegations are out there, and even though Gerard is a colleague,
wow,
it would be inappropriate
drama
to not present this information to you,
Jesus Christ.
Especially because I believe that these videos were made in good faith, and because I do believe that these videos raise important questions that need to be answered. In relation to the podcast, Lucy, Jake, and I are going to talk about it a little more at the top of this week's episode. And we want to address it together because it feels right to do it that way. For now, though, I will say that we've asked Gerard to take a step back from the podcast, at least temporarily, so that he can focus on providing as much information about this situation as he can, and so that he can focus on donating this money to an appropriate charity. That really is the most important thing in all of this. I don't want to say any more about it now out of respect for my co-host, and also because I really value Gerard. I really admire the charity work he's done over the years, not just with this charity, mind you, but with many others. So I want to give him the chance to respond to all of this, and so that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to say for now. Okay, so...
Wow, one of the FPS members was a thief?
Let's make fun of some video game news, I guess. I do apologize in advance if my heart is not as it usually is. I hope you'll forgive me, but like they say in show business, the show must
He's
go
got
on.
drama.
Unless it's
Oh,
SAG-AFTRA strike, in
I'm
which case
sorry.
The show stops for like 3 months while the nanny leads her troops to victory. The good news is that we have actually got plenty of video game news to keep us distracted this week. and news doesn't get much bigger than GTA 6. Yes, hardy ha, it happened again. Some big video game company carefully tracked the typical upload time of This Week in Video Games and made sure to post their news exactly 15 minutes before the episode was due to go live. This time it was Rockstar's turn to have their fun, but not before Jason Schreier stole a little bit of their thunder first. Last week he got the scoop that every game journal on the planet was dying to land. Info on when exactly GTA 6 would be revealed. Just a week after Dunkey uploaded his in-depth history of the GTA 6 announcement fake-outs, Schreier reported that his sources were saying that an announcement was imminent with an official reveal trailer to follow.
GTA 6, hells yeah.
A few hours later, Rockstar took to the tweet machine to dish up the news we've all been waiting for. Quote, next month marks the 25th anniversary of Rockstar Games.
Woo, go Rockstar! We love you! Please stop turning the kids crazy, though.
And we are so grateful to all of you for sharing this journey with us. In 1998, Rockstar Games was founded on the idea that video games could come to be as essential to culture as any other form of entertainment.
Goddamn right.
And we hope that we have created games you love in our efforts to be part of that evolution. We are very excited to let you know that in early December, we will release the first trailer for the next Grand Theft Auto. We look forward to many more years of sharing these experiences with all of you. Thank you, Sam Hauser. I saw this tweet like 5 minutes after it went up, and it already had like 300,000 likes. I heard that it generated so much traffic that it broke Twitter, but let's be real, that doesn't take much these days. Either way, it's exciting, and the promise of an early December reveal is a very salacious one indeed. Could Jeff Keighley have landed the biggest game announcement in the history of game announcements for the Game Awards, scheduled on December 8th? It's possible, but to be honest, I doubt it. Rockstar, and I don't know if you know this, but they're kind of a big deal, and if they don't have to share the stage with other video game announcements, then why should they? Still, the Game Awards is convenient, with viewership topping over 100 million a year, and if you can tie your announcement to all that awards chatter, then why not? And can you imagine the grin on Jeff Keighley's face if he gets to announce a GTA 6 trailer? It is going to be so big and so permanent, he's going to have to call a doctor after 4 hours. I don't need to tell any of you how much of a big deal GTA 6 is. At this point, GTA is less of a video game and more of a cultural artifact. Millions of years from now, when we're long gone and alien archaeologists study our bones, they'll measure our evolution in Grand Theft Autos. They'll be like, ah yes, this human is wearing a bum bag across his chest for some reason. He appears to be from the late GTA 5 age, third console generation. GTA 5 has sold 190 million units and is the single most profitable piece of entertainment media in human history. The fact that GTA 6 has been developed for this long only further adds to people's excitement. But even if Rockstar just whipped this up and farted it out in 3 months, it'd still sell 90 million units. That is the power of GTA. Though, to be fair, the studio maintains an exceptionally high quality bar on their mainline releases, like Red Dead Redemption 2. Just don't bring
I like Dirty R2 more than GTA 5. Yep.
Hey, just briefly, while we're on the topic of GTA, did you hear that Netflix might be trying to get on that Rockstar teat? The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Netflix are trying to sign a licensing deal that would see a Grand Theft Auto game come exclusively to Netflix. It's unclear who might make this game, what type of game it would be, whether it be mobile or somehow playable on TV. We don't know anything. Hell, the whole thing could be bullshit. And you know what? I kind of wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Man, it might be.
It's not like Rockstar needs to sign a deal like this for cash. They have more money than all the pharaohs combined, adjusted for inflation, of course. So I don't know, you can kind of put me in the skeptical column when it comes to this report. Take-Two Interactive are the publishers of Grand Theft Auto, and they've been projecting a quadrupling of income next year as they brace for GTA 6's release. CEO Strauss Zelnick also spoke about the longer-term plans for the publisher as they move into what he's calling a growth phase. Take-Two had previously undergone a cost-cutting and restructuring program that he says was successful, and the Take-Two are now right-sized. One of those really awful corporate euphemisms that just means we sacked a bunch of people and now we're making even more profits. Which sadly brings us to the unfortunately recurrent segment in This Week in Video Games, the part where we discuss the layoffs. Man, I really wish we could go back to those heady days of no fucking thanks. It was way more fun laughing at companies KOing themselves with monkey JPEGs than it is to have to list hundreds of game dev jobs lost every week. And yet here we are, and the first cab off the rank really hurts. Digital Extremes, makers of Warframe, they are not only cutting staff, but they're also getting out of the publishing business, and they're cutting ties with Wayfinder, the MMO light that they just released from developer Airship Syndicate. So we all know DE for Warframe and Soulframe maybe, which is their next major in-house project. In addition to that though, the studio also had a publishing arm which put out a few titles including Survived By, and more recently...
Let's go look at Wayfinder again. MMO Lite. Yeah, I saw this and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to skip
This
then.
video goes out to all to railguns. Each of these have a unique mechanic and special ability as well. For example, this chainsaw sword and shield that builds up a gauge from heavy attacks, which can then be spent on a shield throw to blitz through targets. Combat itself feels pretty decent as well. It's an action game, so you have light and heavy attacks. Ranged weapons have this active reload thing, and enemies telegraph their attacks for you to block, parry, or dodge out of. So there's quite a distinct number of play styles to mix and match, which is great for keeping things fresh, but I do have some grievances. Number one, there's a whole lot of animation lock going on here that just doesn't feel great at all. It's okay during melee because you're more or less stuck in place when you're attacking anyway, but it feels not so great on those like ranged characters, as you can shoot while you're moving around, but then get rooted in place just to like lob a bomb. There's quite long aftercasts as well, that being the time between when you cast one skill and then another. So using abilities in quick succession feels a bit clunky, especially on the faster pace.
It's all it is combat.
Jump, especially because you're incentivized to clear as many random events and mobs as you can to maximize your final rewards. Those events range from killing waves of enemies in a time limit or lining up, have multiple telegraphed abilities. Sometimes there'll be a few waves of weaker mobs to clear in between phases, or some
It looks uninspired to me a little bit.
Wayfinder didn't do so good. It had
Yeah.
the cataclysmically bad launch window that most live service games have, combined with the fact that it was an early access release with plenty of bugs and issues holding the game back.
It's
As
a
result,
live
the
service
Never
game.
really got any momentum, and right now it's averaging a peak concurrent player count of 600 people on Steam. which is
600
not
people.
great.
These
These
games are
publishing rights
tanking.
to the game over to
Tanking.
Syndicate, who in turn have publicly
That's not
confirmed that they plan
acceptable.
to continue working on the game, which is honestly great because Austin reviewed it and he said it had some great bones. Link below the like button. It'd be a real shame to see this one die so quick. But Digital Extreme's external projects division is gone. Some
No, they made a stinker, and I don't know.
To Polygon saying, quote, "I'm sick to my stomach. I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent," end quote. I wish I could cover this story in more detail, but unfortunately there are just too many other layoffs to cover this week. Like Free Radical Design, for example. This is the studio that made the legendary Time Splitters back in the day, and then the GPU melting Crysis game when they became Crytek. That studio was closed in 2014, but in 2021, Embracer Group reformed them under the Free Radical Design label so they could make an all-new Time Splitters game. Well, as we all know, Embracer Group are desperately hawking everything not nailed down at the moment, and it seems as though Free Radical Design might be their next cost-cutting casualty, with staff at the studio being informed last week that the studio could soon close. That notification is a requirement under UK law, which means that 30 days after that, Embracer is free to shutter the studio. As a result, VGC are reporting that at least 15 people employed at the studio have begun looking for other work. Alright, Unity's up next, fresh off their recent bit of brand kamikaze action, you know, where they tried to screw over every single developer that uses their engine with a ridiculously ill-conceived installation tax. Well, with that clangor now firmly in their past, they're on to the next one, layoffs. They announced they intended to lay off staff as they're still losing money year on year. 125 million this year, down from 250 million last year. So far, the only executive I've seen lose their job is CEO John Riccatello. I would be very interested to see how many more of them lose their jobs as part of this cost-cutting initiative. Spoiler alert, it's probably going to be zero. Now, if there's one company that we know is really doing it tough and that really needs to do some belt-tightening, it's Amazon. You think Jeff Bezos' transformation into Pitbull comes cheap? Look at those glasses, man. They're worth at least a few thousand. Point is, Amazon only made $244 billion.
Only 244.
So they got to make some tough decisions to bring their costs down. That is why this week they sacked 180 people from their video games division. It is not a joke, by the way. They actually did that. This reporting originated with Aftermath, a new site that arrived on the scene last week. They reported that Amazon were about to axe 180 jobs, and then Amazon confirmed it to Aftermath. Quote, "We listen to our customers, and we know that delivering free games every month is what they want most. So we are refining our Prime benefit to increase our focus there. With these changes in our business approach comes some changes to our resourcing, resulting in the elimination of just over 180 roles," end quote. That being from Chris Hartman, VP of Amazon Games. These workers join the 27,000 other workers that Amazon laid off in the past 12 months. Again, $244 billion in profit.
Fuck.
The hits keep coming, though this is the last one for the week. Ubisoft, despite earlier saying that they wouldn't do job cuts and would rely on natural attrition for their cost-cutting goals, this week announced that they'd be laying off 124 people, localized almost entirely in their Canadian operations. This does follow a very difficult and patchy period in Ubisoft's history, with the publisher struggling to evolve key franchises, break into mobile, or stand up new IPs. Just recently, Ubisoft announced a delay of a major title in development, but weren't specific about which one that was, and they also kinda delayed Skull and Bones again, since they had earlier vaguely hinted that it might have come out this year, but in a recent earnings call they confirmed that it won't arrive until early next year, unless of course it gets delayed again, which, you know, probably will happen because it's Skull and Bones. In more encouraging news, Ubisoft celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the best Assassin's Creed ever. I'm talking, of course, about Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Ubisoft revealed that over 34 million people have had those pirate shanties stuck in their head, especially that one about the whiskey. And with these sorts of numbers, you really got to hope that the rumors of a Black Flag remake end up being true.
Black Flag remake. It's the only one I've ever liked.
Modern Warfare 3 campaign. Did you find a spare 3 hours to knock it over? By now, you might have heard that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3's single-player campaign is pretty much the worst in the franchise's history. A fact not altogether surprising, since apparently this entry wasn't initially planned as a mainline offering and was originally positioned as an expansion for Modern Warfare 2. Jason Schreier of Bloomberg said he spoke to people close to the development process, and they report that Modern Warfare 3 was developed in around 18 months compared to the typical 3-year development cycle that Call of Duty games have. This understandably led to some staff having to work intense hours to get the job done, but no one seems to be alleging a widespread culture of crunch to get the game over the finish line. Sledgehammer representatives have pushed back on this, saying that reports that the development timeline was shortened were wholly inaccurate, and that some developers may have thought it was just an expansion rather than a premium release, because it was a, quote, new type of direct sequel, end quote. Not sure how the developers could be confused about that, but anyway. Regardless, the reviews paint a grim picture and definitely take some luster off a franchise that Microsoft just spent a lot of money to acquire. That wasn't all Microsoft bought, though. They also got their green mitts on Blizzard, and Schreier was at BlizzCon speaking to Blizzard leadership about what was next for them as they transition into this new Microsoft era. Blizzard President Mike Ybarra seems very optimistic about the whole thing. He told Schreier, quote, going to Phil Spencer and saying, hey, can we do this? I think he would look at me and go, run your studio. I do think our decision-making will be faster, end quote. Schreier also reported that we should be expecting World of Warcraft expansions to be arriving much faster. In a fascinating and underreported extract, Blizzard revealed that they now have effectively 3 teams working on WoW, a live team as well as 2 teams working on expansions in parallel, meaning that they can kind of leapfrog over each other every year, similar to the way that Call of Duty's 3 studios do. Blizzard have promised on many, many occasions that we should expect a faster cadence for WoW content, but it looks like they're finally set up to make good on that promise. It certainly wasn't all good news for Microsoft and Blizzard, though, as this week saw the formal dissolution of the Overwatch League. After initially selling spots for $20 million a pop, Blizzard's mismanagement of the Overwatch IP saw interest in the league dwindle away, and this week the teams themselves voted to end the league. This triggers a termination clause, meaning that Microsoft will have to pay out $120 million across the 20 teams, compensating them for lost investment and ongoing revenue. And imagine buying a company for $69 billion and the first thing you get is a bill for $120 million. It's a sad end to what was at one point the most hyped up esports event on the calendar, with dreams to establish city-based teams similar to something like the NFL. That's all gone now, and it's highly likely that Overwatch esports tournaments...
Overwatch was not good enough for that. Not at all. Fortnite is, but not Overwatch.
Larian Studios say they're making great progress on Baldur's Gate 3 running on the Xbox Series S. Larian boss Sven Vinky tweeted out that the latest build was using 34% less VRAM, which is a lot, to the point where other developers were scratching their heads like, how the fuck did you do that? Baldur's Gate 3 still doesn't have an exact release date, despite reports earlier this week that there was one, reporting quickly doused by Larian's head of publishing himself. Hopefully it isn't far off, and this latest news from Vinky about the state of the port is very encouraging indeed. Veteran voice actor Elias Tufexis revealed this week that he was, at one point, one of the player voices in Starfield. During development, the game did have a voice for you, the playable character, and Tufexis was one of those voices. When Bethesda pivoted to a silent protagonist, they recast him and Sissy Jones as some of the main NPCs in the game. Pretty cool move, since Tufexis says that in those instances, it's more typical for talent to receive a polite thank you before being shown the door. Nintendo are expanding their digs, but their plans have been delayed because they want to make their new center even bigger. While the rest of the industry is laying people off left, right, and center, Nintendo announced that their new development center is going to be completed a year later than initially planned, because Nintendo have increased the scale of the proposed building, citing a need to hire more staff in the future. A games publisher actively hiring and promising to hire more? Haters will say it's fake. Staying in that part of the world, good news for Xbox, it's big in Japan. Not really, but it is getting bigger. Phil Spencer was speaking to Famitsu, and in that interview, he said that the PC gaming market in Japan had doubled since 2020, and the number of Game Pass subscriptions in Japan had quadrupled. Those are very vindicating figures for Spencer, who's made a big push of trying to break into the Japanese market after the Xbox brand having effectively no presence there since day dot, utterly trounced by both Sony and Nintendo. Strategic partnerships with the likes of Sega, Square Enix, and Capcom seem to be bearing fruit. Good job, Phil.
Some of those Japanese boys probably really want some Xbox.
New booty just dropped. Man, I've been waiting to say that line all week. This week, Microsoft announced the appointment of Alan Hartman as the new head of Xbox Studios. Hartman was formerly over at Turn 10, makers of Forza Motorsport, but he's now taking over Matt Booty's old job. Hence, new booty just dropped. It was a long walk to get there, but I think the payoff was worth it. So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, first up, we got word that King Arthur
Your skill has increased.
current-gen consoles on February 22nd. This is a turn-based tactics game from Neocore that got a really great reception when it released on PC last year, and next year it'll be available for both PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. Wolong Fallen Dynasty is getting another DLC pack in December. It's called Upheaval in Jinxiang, and it's another chapter in the increasingly sprawling Wolong saga. This is their third DLC expansion after all. It is paid DLC and it arrives on December 12th, but Team Ninja have also just rolled out a Neo 2 collaboration mission, available free to all players. Last week we got Risk of Rain Returns, the remaster of the original. This week we got the announcement of Risk of Rain 2 Seekers of the Storm. It's an all-new expansion to Risk of Rain 2, the first that Gearbox have solo developed since they had to help a former developer Hoppu Games on the previous DLC. This one adds all of the things you'd expect: new survivors, new levels, new enemies, new power-ups, and more. It's a high bar for Gearbox to clear since Hoppu have done absolutely phenomenal work on the series to this point. Hopefully Gearbox can keep it going because it still feels like Risk of Rain has a lot of life left in it yet. Seekers of the Storm has been revealed but no release date announced. I'll keep you posted. Hades is headed to mobile. Good news, right? Well, yes, but there is some bad news too. First up, it's exclusive to Netflix. To be able to play it, you need a Netflix subscription, and then you need to access the game via the Netflix app on mobile. Even more disappointing, it's exclusive to iOS devices, meaning that Android is completely frozen out on this one. Also, no Windows Phone port. Very sad times for the 4 people still ironically rocking one of these devices. Still, Hades has always been best played on handheld, so it's kind of cool that Apple kids will get to enjoy this one. It arrives sometime in 2024, no day yet, and I do wonder if this precedes an announcement of a Netflix-produced Hades TV show, because let's be real, that would be incredible. I think if Netflix executives understood the power of Rule 34, they would have greenlit this years ago, so it's nice to see them finally playing catch-up. 2 delay announcements this week, both of them coming in rather clutch, actually. The first is for the Turok 3 remaster from Night Dive. It was
Turok 3 does not need to be remastered. The fucking terrible game. What are you talking about? That game sucked.
Another delay was for another game that was meant to release this past week, Broken Roads. This is the Australian-themed CRPG, which I'm calling Dingo Elysium. Anyone? No? Okay, alright, forget that. Whatever, let's just move on. So, this was meant to arrive last week to the point where review code had actually gone out to reviewers and people were playing it. But at the 11th hour, the studio announced a delay, and not a small one either. They're pushing it into 2024, and they haven't even provided a new date yet. The team say that the final product is a lot bigger than they'd first set out to make, clocking in at over 30 hours of gameplay and 400,000 words of dialogue, and so they needed more time to polish it up before launch. That's cool and all, but obviously something's gone at least a little haywire when you delay your game after review code is already out. Still, I respect the team for making this call. This past month alone, we've had 2 titles, City Skylines 2 and Tintin Reporter, both warn their audiences that the game runs like shit, promising to fix it post-launch rather than delay the game. That's a pretty shitty move, so as disappointing as it is, I'll happily take it over the alternative. So what came out last week? Only a handful of releases actually. First up was Risk of Rain Returns, a remaster of the original game, but updated to include content pulled from Risk of Rain 2, as well as an overhaul of the multiplayer, making it, playable out of the box rather than reliant on third-party services. Risk of Rain Returns has launched extremely strongly with a peak of 45,000 concurrent players on Steam, or approximately 28 Redfalls. On Steam, there are already over 7,000 reviews in, 83% of the
28 Red
and
Balls.
critics are even more impressed with it sitting at a mighty 87%
Your skill has increased.
Gaming Bolts scored this one a 9 out of 10, saying, quote, "Whether it's your first run or your 50th, Risk of Rain Returns offers roguelike action like few other titles. The HD visuals and new content are great, but the game's excellent core is polished and enhanced even more," end quote. I'm actually playing through this one right now on my new Steam Deck OLED, and I can confirm that it is indeed excellent. The game, that is. I mean, the Steam Deck too, as well, of course. But I can very much see Risk of Rain Returns being another one of those games that I just leave permanently installed. Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, released last week for all platforms bar the Switch. This is a one-shot spin-off that continues the story of Kiryu, albeit in flashback form before he starts rocking that grey hair we all saw in the Infinite Wealth trailer. This one also keeps the real-time brawler combat that fans of the series could only recently get from the Judgment games, since the mainline entries have moved to turn-based combat. Like pretty much everything else RGG puts out, the fans have gone nuts for it. The title's sitting at overwhelmingly positive 95% on Steam. However, critics are a lot cooler on it, putting it at a strong 79. IGN scored this one a 7 out of 10, saying, quote, "Like a Dragon Gaiden's combat hits with flash and fury, and its story is sharp, but its setting and side activities feel a bit on the stale side," end quote. GameSpot offered a similar sentiment, but a little more enthusiastically put, quote, "RGG Studios' latest action brawler is a captivating and emotional look at Kiryu's life that offers a greatest hits of the series' gameplay," end quote. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 was the biggest release of last week, but we covered that one off earlier. Only other release was Spirit Tea, that Spirited Away-esque cozy game that sees you managing a bathhouse for the gods, pumping the bellows, serving hot meals, and performing general maintenance while trying to live a life in the quirky town below. I played the demo and loved every second of it. Not many reviews for this one out yet, sadly. Only 74 reviews on Steam, but it's sitting at 94% positive. And only one critic review, that of VG247. They did score it a 5 out of 5 though, saying, quote, "There's just so much to love about Spirit Tea, and I'm very glad to be able to say that this adorable rural life sim has been well worth the wait," end quote. Best of all, this one's on Game Pass, so if you're at all interested to give it a spin, I suspect you won't be disappointed. So what's coming out this week? Nothing massive, but some cool stuff nonetheless. Stuff like The Last Faith, an awesome looking 2D Souls-like Metroidvania with some top tier character designs and animations. This is one that I profiled a while back on my Put This On Your Radar segment. People really dug it. They loved it even more when they got the chance to play the Steam demo during the Steam Next Fest. Now you can play it for real when the title launches on all platforms today. Teardown is very special. This is a
Teardown's good.
Unlike Payday 3, it actually works and you can play it. It's voxel based, and the idea is to plan out the most efficient heist possible by blowing up as much or as little as is necessary. It's incredible to watch. Just seeing the responsiveness of this engine is wild. The shit that can happen is insane. And the campaign has over 40 missions for you to muck around in addition to other game modes. I still don't think this one is talked about as much as it should be, but hopefully the console release helps that. It's hitting PS5 and Xbox Series consoles today. Dredge is getting its first DLC release tomorrow. It's called The Pale Reach, and it offers another 1 to 3 hours of content available at any time throughout your playthrough, delivering an all-new chapter in the storyline along with new equipment, new fish to catch, and a new boat that is able to ram its way through the frozen ice. Very nice. Seems like a small but dense bit of content, not unlike the main game itself, since Dredge was really, really excellent. If you haven't checked it out yet, then this is a very good excuse to do so. Assassin's Creed Nexus is a VR game exclusive to MetaQuest headsets. True story. Ubisoft emailed me about this and were like, "Do you want to play a preview build?" And I was like, "No thank you, I prefer to keep my lunch in my stomach." I can handle a bit of movement in VR games, but this has like massive aerial free falling and dodge rolls, and I was like, nope, hard pass on all that, thank you very much. Still, if you've got the stomach for it, it'll arrive exclusive to MetaQuest 2 and 3 tomorrow. No word yet on when it might arrive for other platforms. Earlier this year, Jagged Alliance returned after a 20-year hiatus. Jagged Alliance 3 released to very strong reviews and great feedback from the strategy community. It now makes its way to PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. Those ports drop tomorrow. Speaking of tactics games, one of the 2 bigger releases of the week is Persona 5 Tactica, a tactic-style spin-off featuring the iconic Persona 5 cast. Early previews for this one have been extremely encouraging, which is not at all surprising given that it's Atlas at the helm, and while they may put out some patchy releases across their portfolio, they do not mess around when it comes to Persona. Both 5 and Royal are among the best RPGs ever made, and Persona 5 Strikers was surprisingly excellent despite its shift to an entirely new combat style. This more tactics-inspired spin on the franchise looks right at home, and you can tell that Atlas has spared little expense when it comes to things like presentation and cutscenes. Best of all, it's hitting all platforms at the same time, a welcome change for a franchise that's often much more staggered in its approach to port rollout. This arrives for PC, Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox on the 17th. The other big release this week is a remake that seems to have Nintendo fans a little teary-eyed with nostalgia. Super Mario RPG launches for the Nintendo Switch on the 17th, a top-to-bottom remake of the classic RPG that kickstarted the whole "what if Mario could do more than just jump" thing. The remake isn't just a visual overhaul, though it does look pretty damn great. It's also got some big gameplay changes, adding new features to combat, new quality of life improvements, and so much more. Nintendo did a round of previews for this one, and everyone who played the original walked away giddy with the excitement to see how much Nintendo were doing with this one. Sadly, I'm a little too busy to play this one this week, but I'll certainly be adding it to my pile of shame since I never actually played the original, and that feels like a gap I ought to plug. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Realms of Ruin is a new RTS game set in the other part of the Warhammer universe, the one that doesn't get as much love as 40k these days. And can I just say that it's pretty cool that we're getting an RTS game of any description. This is a genre that's really fallen by the wayside this past decade. Hell, the last one I can recall seeing getting any major attention was Dune Spice Wars, and even that had a whole bunch of 4X stuff going on in it. Realms of Ruin looks to be a lot more by the numbers in the best possible way, and it's great to see this sort of game getting made in 2023. If this one interests you, it's hitting all platforms bar the Switch on the 17th. That Expanse Telltale game has now wrapped up all of its episodes and will make its way to Steam on the 20th. It got decent reviews, probably not a must-play if you're not a fan of the source material, but Belter loaders are sure to get a kick out of this one. And finally, Worldless arrives on all platforms on the 21st. This is that charming-looking 2D platformer that also has 2D combat. I profiled this one a few weeks ago in my Put This On Your Radar segment, and now it's out. Speaking of which, put this on your radar. CRPGs are undergoing a much-deserved renaissance at the moment, thanks to not only Baldur's Gate 3, but before that, Disco Elysium. This is Sovereign Syndicate, and it definitely appears to be much closer to that Disco Elysium mold. It's a narrative-led, choice-driven CRPG with a twist, in that instead of being reliant on a dice roll to determine outcomes, you'll use tarot cards instead. The game features an open world set in a steampunk rendition of Victorian London with some simple but effective art design on display. It also features 3 playable characters, a human, a minotaur, and a robot that kind of looks like Blitzcrank. Each of these characters has their own unique backstory, and people will respond to them differently as you meet them. Because yeah, if I met a Minotaur, I'd probably respond a little differently than if I just met a regular-ass human being. This one is a self-published title from Crimson Herring Studios, and it just locked in a release date, January 16th next year. If you'd like to check it out or maybe wishlist it, I've profiled it over on my Steam Curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This On Your Radar stuff I've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Sort of free stuff time now, and one thing I will shout out is that Black Friday is coming pretty soon, but most retailers will start their Black Friday sales early. Sony, for example, just announced that the PlayStation Black Friday sale will kick off on the 17th, so if you're looking to scoop up some bargains, then the next week or two is a very good chance to do that. If it's straight up sort of free stuff you're looking for, then we've got a smattering of that too. Epic are right now giving away Golden Light, which is a very weird looking survival horror FPS. And later this week they'll be handing out Surviving the Aftermath, a post-apocalyptic city builder. Think The Last of Us, but top down and without the zombies. Prime Gaming are giving away a brand new release this week. It's that Invincible Presents Adam Eve game, which I spoke about last week. It's a visual novel based on the Adam Eve spin-off. If you're hankering for even more Invincible stuff with the release of Season 2, then Amazon have got you covered. Finally, Game Pass are having a pretty solid week. June Spice Wars hits the service for cloud and console. Rollerdrome makes a surprise appearance, which is fantastic because Rollerdrome is absolutely superb. Please, if you haven't played it, go out of your way to play it. It is that good. And finally, Persona 5 Tactica launches day and date on Game Pass, a very far cry from the days of Persona games being like a 3-year PlayStation exclusive. For our Feel Good Story for the week, I thought it'd be nice to do a bit of a warm-up round for the Game Awards by taking a look at the winners of the recent Golden Joystick Awards. This happened last week in the UK. I'm told that event organisers put on an open bar from 1 PM and then the ceremony kicked off at like 6 PM. So you can imagine how loose things were by that point. Regardless, gongs were gonged, awards were handed out, and speeches were made. It was awesome to see Sea of Stars win Best Indie Game this year. The team behind that was so incredibly passionate and did such an amazing job. Really awesome to see them get that kind of recognition. Best performance went to none other than Ben Starr. Sadly, it was not for his iconic Mario audition, but rather his role as Clive Rosfield, the unreasonably attractive leading man of Final Fantasy 16. There were some incredible voice performances this year, and Starr's work was truly outstanding, very well deserved indeed. Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty got the Best Expansion Award. I'm not sure what the competition was for that category, but that seemed like a pretty easy W for CD Projekt Red. Best Nintendo game went to Tears of the Kingdom. Best PlayStation game went to Resident Evil 4 Remake, which is weird, but Spider-Man 2 wasn't eligible for the vote based on timing. And Best Xbox game went to Starfield. Personally, I think Hi-Fi Rush deserved a look in, but hey, I have not yet played Starfield, so I couldn't say. The biggest winner of the night, though, was of course Baldur's Gate 3, which won a grand total of 7 awards, including Visual Design, Community, Best Supporting Performer to Neil Newborn, the voice of Astarion, PC Game of the Year, Best Storytelling, Studio of the Year, and of course, Ultimate Game of the Year. There were over 20 Larian developers at the event to celebrate in person, and it's truly incredible to see a self-published Dungeons & Dragons CRPG become the phenomenon that has become. And as impressive as this award sweep is, I expect we'll see a full repeat of it very soon at Jeff Keighley's shindig. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for you today. Not really sure what else to say, so I think I'll just end it there and say thank you very much for stopping by. I always really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was
I will see you
really good. Thank you, Skill Up, for the excellent concert for my stream. I'd like to sub to your channel.
It's the writing, but that's just scratching the surface. Playing Starfield is an exercise in endless frustration, made all the more painful because the vast majority of its flaws stem from baffling top-level design decisions. Like Skyrim and Fallout 4, Starfield is fundamentally broken, and it didn't need to be. I understand that Bethesda titles are intended as games where you can turn your brain off and have fun for a couple hours. However, there's no shortage of games like that these days, and many of them are more fun and more respectful of your time. Moreover, if you want an inch more than mindless fun from your video games, you're not going to find it here. It's not about bugs, it's not about the updated engine, the performance, or anything else technical. Even if this game ran flawlessly, it would just be putting mediocre content in front of you as smoothly as possible. Starfield, like its predecessors, is a game that buys into the fallacy that quantity is equivalent to quality. It's built around shoveling so much shit in your face that's so easy to consume that the thought of doing or playing anything else is exhausting. Anti-immersion. Despite Starfield constantly crowing about the grandeur of exploring amongst the stars, this is a skin-deep affectation. All the wistful platitudes uttered in-game don't change the fact that the game is uninterested in its own genre or premise. Even though this is apparently a title Todd Howard has wanted to make for a long time, Starfield has no grand vision, no core themes or ideas to explore with any sort of depth. No story that someone was dying to tell. Seems the only enjoyment you can extract out of it is an endless, shallow dopamine treadmill of explore, kill, loot, explore until you're too tired to continue. The strategy says this is a game designed around pecking some buttons and getting some corn. It's so staggeringly safe and boring I can't come to any conclusion except that it was designed to be that way. More than any other Bethesda title, Starfield has confirmed for me that the studio is no longer disguising their disrespect for the player's time, intelligence, agency, or imagination. I'm Gunmetal. I make high-effort shit posts, ones that often contain broad, sweeping statements like that last doozy. Although I get hyperbolic for comedy's sake and so I can try and have productive conversations about improving the medium as a whole, this time I'm doing so because I'm tired. I'm real tired. Tell me about the rabbits, Todd. This video is a long-form critique and analysis for Starfield. But like, why am I bothering? Why level all this criticism at Bethesda and Starfield? Why get so in-depth about something intended as brainless fun? After all, not every game has to be a rich artistic masterpiece, nor should they be. No one wants to slave away for 16 hours at the bullshit factory, then come home and play Pathologic. No. I'm digging deep into why Starfield sucks because aiming for mediocrity and hitting the mark isn't something to celebrate. Bethesda used to make definitive role-playing games, games that push the boundaries of what video games can do and what they could be. They've since belt-sanded away every facet of their games that made them popular in the first place out of a misguided directive to be as mass-market friendly as possible. What rubs salt in the wound is that they keep topping sales charts, so there's no actual incentive to improve them. Of course, I can't blame a massive corporate entity for acting like a massive corporate entity, but I question the necessity of it. The RPG dark ages of the early 2000s and 2010s are over. Broader gaming audiences are capable of parsing more complex games with deeper mechanics and mature stories. Yet Bethesda still thinks being mass-market friendly means you need to treat your customers like they're brain-dead morons. That might sound a little entitled and pretentious, but I think it's valid to criticize their games in this way when Starfield is suffering from the same problems that Fallout 3 15 years ago. To me, at least, it seems like they've only gotten worse. With The Elder Scrolls 6 in the earliest phases of production, it's an important time to be critical. I understand that's like trying to drain the Pacific Ocean with a 5-gallon bucket. I'm not on so much copium that I think Bethesda is going to make anything like Morrowind again, but it's insane how much missed potential there is in Starfield. That's another reason why I think people keep coming back to Bethesda games, why people keep making videos like these, why wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle keeps frustrating so many. They make ambitious games, but their ambition is solely directed towards maximalism. The drive to make their games as large and broad as possible. games that can be everything for everyone, forever. With a little imagination, it's pretty easy to see how rejecting this impulse could make these games so much more than they actually are. That's also why the Bethesda modding community is so huge. It wouldn't exist if these games didn't have a spark of something incredible buried under all the layers of annoying bullshit. Modern Bethesda games succeed despite their simplicity, not because of it. I've always held that their games being such huge successes is due to their presentation and marketing. They could have maintained their previous level of complexity and done equally well. Instead, we suffer the Bethesda curse. No one else is really making this type of RPG, meaning we have to endure every single condescending high-level design choice and oversimplified system just to experience them. In this regard, Starfield is no different. Every now and then, there's glimpses of potential. When the game stops talking, when it slows down, when it disengages from its tedious core gameplay loop, you can see the bones of something incredible. And then it's over, crushed under the weight of a dozen baffling design decisions that undercut themselves at every turn. Starfield is a game at war with itself, and playing it feels like walking on a field of race. You have to fight the game to get invested in the storytelling. You have to fight the game to roleplay. You have to fight the game to play it as intended. You have to fight the game to enjoy it at all. But before we get to unpacking all of that, I want to start off with the positives, that missed potential. After all, if it was totally bereft of interesting ideas or imagination, it'd be a Ubisoft game, and I wouldn't bother complaining. So, in order to examine why Starfield sucks and how it's fundamentally broken, we first have to talk about that classic Bethesda magic, that spark of something fantastic that keeps us crawling back. From here on out, there will be very thorough spoilers for the entire game, so if you care about that, thanks for stopping by. I promise there's nothing in Starfield worth saving for yourself, but I still want to offer you the opportunity to click off. Ready? Let's get started.
Aggro.
Everything good I have to say about Starfield comes with an asterisk, but that doesn't mean they're not still positives. Also, although I have been and will continue to be very critical of this game, I want to emphasize that my problems with it are not the fault of the devs who actually made it. Starfield's flaws exclusively stem from Bethesda's upper management and the design document they put together. It was those flawed directives that led to Starfield being the way it is, with the people who put in the blood, sweat, and tears to build the game. I hate saying people call Bethesda games lazy, when that only applies to the higher-ups that want to keep making the same profit machines, not the hundreds of people that have to labor under that myopic scope. In reality, an insane amount of time, effort, talent, and craft went into Starfield. This is a project that involved hundreds of people working endless hours for 8 years to put together, and it shows. It oozes production value. The game existing as it does is a monumental achievement, bugs and all. My hat goes off to them. To that end, I can say at the very least, Starfield feels like the best version of Fallout 4. If you enjoyed Fallout 4 despite its numerous flaws, you'll love Starfield. Granted, it doesn't have the contiguous open-world map, but I find that a worthy trade-off for not experiencing Fallout 4's writing. Starfield has cleaner gunplay, more interesting weapons, more engaging handcrafted dungeons, better art direction, less oppressive level scaling, and better voice acting. That's something I want to highlight. Even though the actual dialogue is not fantastic, the delivery feels like a measurable step up from previous Bethesda titles. It's not always stellar, of course, but that's a ludicrous expectation to have in a game so massive. What's important is that I can tell the cast was trying their best to sell the lines they were given. Everything was feels a little bit better when the dialogue is given more explicit direction, and talented actors are given more space to give real performances. For example, the funeral scene. Your companion with the highest affinity in Constellation dies for dumb, preventable reasons in order to wring some cheap drama out of the story. However, when memorializing the dead character, the actors swung for the fences. They genuinely sound like they're grieving. Even if they couldn't make me care, it convinced me that the characters themselves did. On that note, I have to praise Emily O'Brien, Sarah Morgan's voice actress. Sarah's actual character writing is, at turns, boring, rote, and borderline psychotic. However, at the conclusion of her questline, she takes a quiet moment to grieve for her fallen comrades. It's perfectly paced, perfectly executed, perfectly performed. And for a second, I felt emotion in a Bethesda game. And then we're back on the bullshit. That's also the theme for the best gameplay bits. While the copy-paste dungeons that get slapped down everywhere get old immediately, the handcrafted dungeons are like glimpses into the Starfield that could have been. When the levels have a real idea behind them, the combat is elevated. The gameplay systems come into sharper focus. My favorite dungeon in the game is a derelict spaceship with fluctuating power. Its gravity drive switches off and on at regular intervals, changing up how you fight and how you explore. In that same vein, clearing spacers out of an abandoned zero-G casino was also fun. While shamefully brief, it feels more special and vibrant. There's even colorful touches like a review explaining what a terrible idea it is to have a zero-G nostalgia-baked casino. In the main quest, there's a sci-fi version of the time travel mission from Dishonored 2. Although lessened in that you have to switch over at specific locations and solve more boring problems, it's still a good level with a hidden golden ending for players that are paying attention. The Nishina Research Station is a bit of a slog on subsequent playthroughs, but it's the only level that takes advantage of alternate universes, and I think they did a pretty good job. The climax of the Ryujin questline, infiltrating Infinity Core, is the worst Dishonored level ever made, but it's in Starfield, which makes it fun and interesting. They put real effort into providing different ways to accomplish your objectives, even making sure not to force the player to use their new mind-controlled neuroman. There's a couple more fun levels, but you get the idea. It's the unique locations that work the best. That also goes for the cities and towns of the settled systems. They're typically defined by a single, simple theme, but they still look incredible. Neon is the cyberpunk town and treated with about as much depth as its name, but arriving at it for the first time, watching the lightning arc off the shield, and getting to run around the rooftops is genuinely cool. In addition, these towns typically have more interesting and varied quests that have intent behind them. There's two examples I want to discuss specifically. Although short, there's a brief questlet of sorts on Sidonia where a kid has you hang space fraud posters around the colony. It's small and simple, but it goes a long way toward showing the conditions of the miners, the drudgery of the Martian landscape, how people would think and feel if they were subjected to such conditions. The other is resolving the brownouts in the well of New Atlantis. It's one of the first quests you can get, and doesn't involve much more than flipping switches, but there's clever intent behind it. It takes you all over both the well and New Atlantis proper, conveying through visual storytelling that the gleam and glamour of the United Colonies does not extend to all its citizens. It shows that there's people working within the system that care, but they're being crushed by bureaucracy and apathy. In a quest about flipping switches. These are small and quick, but they represent a handful of good moments sandwiched between the oppressive core gameplay loop. I'm hoping by now you get what I mean when I say everything good has an asterisk. There's no better example of this, I think, than my favorite part of Starfield, the ship building. The ability to design your own ship, paint it up, then walk around inside, decorate it, salute out of it, fight in it, etc. It's awesome. It feels like making your own secondary character within the narrative. With a little time and effort, you can come up with something truly unique and personal to you. It's also something you have to earn. It feels great when you can finally splurge and get the ship you want. It serves the narrative and the gameplay. This goes a long way towards facilitating player expression and creativity. The system is also deeply fucked. You have to grind out one skill to max to get access to all the parts, and then a separate skill to actually fly it, which is all rendered pointless anyway because space combat is awful. We'll talk more about these issues in depth later, but I don't think there's a better case study for how this game feels like it's trying its hardest to stop you from having fun at every turn. Finally, I want to talk about one thing I like that, unfortunately, also broke the game beyond repair. Becoming Starborn. I have many criticisms of Starfield storytelling, but contextualizing New Game Plus as a diegetic consequence of reaching Unity is interesting and ambitious, on the surface. The fact that you can go through the story again and meaningfully behave as though your character already knows what's going to happen is a great idea. This mostly translates into shaving down the amount of time it takes to complete a main story playthrough, which is also smart, but allowing for this must have taken a ton of effort. Your foreknowledge of the story is a mechanic, to the point where you're even allowed to skip it. You also get to be more powerful as your skills and game knowledge carry over. You do the content faster, you know where the best unique stuff is. This works well with how the game does level scaling. I'm never a fan of it, and it has its issues in Starfield too, but restricting it to specific star systems makes the early New Game Plus more engaging. Even though you lose your loot, you can still enjoy being overpowered in those earlier areas. In Skyrim and Fallout 4, the oppressive level scaling brutalized their combat systems, flattening the power curve into the most boring line possible. Not the case with Starfield. I also have plenty of complaints about the combat and loot, but at the very least the game lets you revel in being overpowered for a bit. The bigger issue with Starfield's New Game Plus system has to do with the writing surrounding it, and it's a multi-layered, insurmountable problem. When you walk into Unity, you're prompted with the line, who will you be? What choices will you make? Your ship, weapons, items, and outposts are left behind in the old universe, leaving you with your background, skills, powers, and foreknowledge of what's to come. And therein lies the rub. You know what's going to happen. If you're invested in the game, you've probably already done the faction quest and had your fill of the side content. Then you get to experience the novelty of the Starborn dialogue options. Then, well, nothing. Yet you're incentivized to keep going, even though each hour of gameplay is providing diminishing returns at an exponential rate. Starfield's story and mechanics are designed around facilitating perpetual play. It's a game designed to be as easy as possible to consume with as few barriers to entry in order to maximize hours played. That's the intention, at least. Instead, by ending the story with Unity, by making New Game Plus this way, Starfield forces you time and time again to confront its largest and most glaring flaw. The settled systems are fucking boring. It is, without hyperbole, one of the worst settings I have ever experienced in a video game of this size and scope. Who will you be loses all meaning when the world itself lacks a single interesting idea or ounce of reactivity. There are no meaningful choices to make because the game world they take place in is devoid of imagination. This is why I'm so confident that Starfield was ruined from the top down. Building a setting this bland can only happen intentionally, at a project's inception. The positive section is over now. I cannot overstate enough how brutal of a setback the settled systems are to the overall experience. It is a brick wall of bad that you must surmount to enjoy anything about Starfield. It penalizes your curiosity by crumbling under scrutiny, and penalizes your intelligence by getting dumber and more nonsensical the more you think about it. And that's a goddamn shame. One of the primary reasons I gave Starfield an honest try is because science fiction, in all its forms, is my favorite genre of fiction. There's something deeply appealing about the vastness of space, our grand significance, and expanding or re-examining our scientific understanding. Whether it's relentlessly optimistic, brutally cynical, deeply horrifying, or grand and operatic, science fiction is a fantastic vehicle to examine the human condition, a postmodern artistic landscape. We kill God, and science fiction is how we perform the autopsy. Starfield, however, is not space-themed science fiction for any reason, except that it's sufficiently distinct from Bethesda's other intellectual properties. Starfield's aesthetics deliberately evoke the open-eyed wonder of early-stage space exploration, the glory days of NASA, of pursuing the final frontier and seeing what's out there, which is a cold and calculated deception. Ultimately, Starfield has as much love, respect, and investment in science and space exploration as people who believe in telescopes. Its art direction, its premise, and its very genre all wrote a giant check Bethesda had no hope of cashing. In this lane of science fiction, what makes it memorable and evocative for me is not the sweeping vistas, strange alien creatures, or cool spaceships. That's just the surface level. What matters is the ideas and discussion that these elements provoke. Starfield doesn't have anything except the surface level. The settled systems are a puree of every popular science fiction property from the past 60 years. Yes, even the one you're thinking of right now. It's not uncommon for sci-fi settings to borrow or straight up steal from one another, but they usually put some effort into recontextualizing them. The best questline in Starfield boils down to, hey, remember aliens? The more you like sci-fi, the worse Starfield is. You'll recognize familiar concepts constantly, and you can predict every story beat because you've seen it all before. The most sci-fi feeling moments are tiny questlets shoved as far away from the player's path as possible. Even then, it's like a greatest hits album, to which Starfield has nothing to add. It doesn't pose any questions or present ideas unique to itself. Am machine person? What if space Batman? Soldiers make friends? It's just so generic and tiresome. Not only that, but its aesthetics run contrary to everything presented to you in-game. It's using a grounded, hard science fiction art direction to tell bad Star Wars stories, which never feels to feel jarring and ill-fitting. The only identity Starfield has is it being a Bethesda game. Its systems, storytelling tropes, and gameplay modalities are cobbled together from different properties that don't cohere. The one theme Starfield really hammers at is reconciling rationality and spirituality, which would have been groundbreaking if I was 12, or this was 2002. And it never has anything to say about it because they're terrified the player might be offended. It's surreal to experience because you can feel the editor's notes butting in whenever the narrative is in danger of challenge or getting too detailed. Every world-building detail within the settled system is committed to being non-confrontational and being as agreeable and toothless as humanly possible. Starfield breaks new ground by being the first game written by an HR department. This isn't asking the players questions and letting them come to their own conclusions. It's mealy mouth corpo writing, talking out of both sides of their mouths about concepts they have no investment in. I don't expect you to take me at my word. We're going to talk about specific storytelling failures and missed potential soon, but it's important to bring this up first. Every flaw in Starfield is derived from this lack of narrative ambition, and this lack of ambition was intentional. The only thing it cares about is being big. Here's a quote from an ad disguised as an NPR interview. Design director Emil Pagliarulo, who oversaw much of the game's lore and quest design, understands that with a video game like Starfield, fun comes first. We're making a video game, he says. We're not making Anna Karenina. So Pagliarulo and the team made it their mission to create an escapist fantasy where everything fun that could conceivably happen in space is possible. There's so much to unpack here, it's mind-boggling. When you approach making a game like that, it's easy to see how Starfield falls on its face. Obviously, incredible art can still be fun. Obviously, there's a vast spectrum of art between generic slop and fucking Tolstoy. Obviously, making an enormous game with so much stuff to do is still very ambitious. The issue here is that fun escapism, as defined by Bethesda games, is about never telling the player no, about letting them wander around doing whatever they want. This isn't how they actually play out, but it's clear that's how the studio defines fun. The settled systems were written around the kill, loot, explore Bethesda gameplay. That's what came first. Everything else about the setting is subordinate to that directive. Anything that could interrupt the player pecking the button and getting the corn was surgically excised. Therefore, a bunch of vague noise about big ideas isn't a serious presentation of these topics. To me, it comes off as patronizing. It feels like I'm being treated with kitty gloves. Like if my beliefs are challenged or I'm presented with a potentially uncomfortable idea, I'll turn the game off. And that kind of writing is diametrically opposed to what Starfield attempts to evoke. Safety, familiarity, and repetition are the enemies of true exploration. Starfield is not a mirror to the player and never could be. Bethesda's game design ethos would never allow it. Once you start looking at the game this way, a lot of the world building falls into place. Alright, I've put it off long enough. I owe you examples and specificity. Let's take a dive into the settled systems. A galaxy full of nothing. In its desire to be as non-confrontational as possible, Starfield broke itself in half. A game trying to say our choices are what make us human cannot then present such lifeless characters, such a dearth of difficult decisions, and a complete lack of reactivity. Above all else, Starfield is about maintaining the status quo. A game that's nominally about exploration and furthering our understanding of the universe is about keeping everything the same. The one change you can make in the game is the fate of the key, a single derelict space station. Everything else is restricted to what passes for ending slides, which are all binary, don't seem to have any real impact on the settled systems, and are guaranteed to be seen less and less as you progress your new game plus. Unity is an ugly, half-hearted concession to actual narrative closure, a vestigial limb sewn onto a bloated monstrosity of a game that desperately wants to be Destiny. However, there was an incredible opportunity in presenting the ending slides like this. Imagine if you were allowed to ask Unity questions about these outcomes, or you were allowed to provide clarification on why you made the decisions you did. That would give the writers so much room to expand on the consequences of your choices, poke at your decision-making process, and make the choices feel more real, like your own. Instead, there's like 2 sentences of vague nonsense that doesn't feel like it changed anything at all. Even more aggravating is that these slides are almost entirely tied to the factions, which are some of the most stilted and lifeless groups ever put to code. They have no identity beyond their art direction, have no beliefs outside their elevator pitch. This is because Starfield is trying as hard as it can to be apolitical. Constellation is apolitical. The news network is apolitical. Galbank is apolitical. But that's not what that word means. Bethesda, whether through ignorance or malice, is misconstruing politics to mean nationality. The 2 nations in Starfield, the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective, are just different flavors of American neoliberal capitalism. It's like a version of New Vegas where the epic struggle over the Hoover Dam is between the NCR and the NCR wearing a cowboy hat. Their right to govern, their method of governance, their ideologies, none are ever explored or even questioned. They say they have different priorities and ideals, but they are functionally identical. The only difference between them is their aesthetics. If that's the intention, if Starfield is trying to say, hey, they're both missing the point, then why is that never discussed? There's a single woefully short lore tablet pointing out how dumb the colony war was, but in the general why can't we get along sense, it even points out that there's no reason to have a war over resources or living space because there's mineral-rich, human-compatible planets everywhere. You can wipe your ass with habitable planets. But this criticism is offered with the wide-eyed naivete that there's so much more out there than playing politics. Except that's insane. Even as a spacefaring race, human beings still have to exist. They will still build societies and cultures which will interact with one another. And that's politics. Some of the best science fiction can be boiled down to exactly that. I can absolutely believe that something like the colony war might happen in a galaxy of plenty, but justification is never given. No side is given ulterior motives or grievances, legitimate or otherwise. They're not an ideological conflict, there's no population pressures, no competition for resources or living space, nothing. It's supremely dumb, not in a way that's engaging. The colony war is a keystone component in the lore of the settled systems, but it isn't more engaging or complex than bashing Firefly and Expanse action figures against each other. None of the NPCs or the factions they belong to have aspirations, culture, or convictions. There isn't a single union in the game. That might have been too close to saying something, and then the player might turn the game off. Can't have that. Did Jeff Bezos write this game? United Colonies and Freestar Collective are presented with flaws, but ones that are too simple and on the nose to feel authentic. Moreover, nothing about them is revealed or changed throughout the course of the narrative. You can guess their entire shtick the instant you encounter them, and you will always be correct. You'll never be surprised, confronted, or allowed to alter the dynamic. The UC is up to some sinister shit, but when you try and call them out on it or screw them over, the game slaps your hand over it, because that would change too much. Is not being allowed to reveal that Alldayerrydaybaby supposed to imply that SSNN is as unbiased as they claim, or is it because it changed the status quo too much and required a bunch of extra work for the developer? The answer can only be the latter. They wanted a shocking reveal in one of their quest lines and didn't think about how that might change the overall landscape of the setting. All of the quests are written like this, always resolving in two slightly different, equally acceptable flavors of the pre-existing status quo. As a result of writing the game this way, none of it works. And trying to be so careful and inoffensive, the verisimilitude collapses. Because real people are ideological. They have opinions about how society should be organized, how they want to live their lives, and how their nation should operate. In refusing to portray ideology and actual politics out of a fear of alienating the player, the NPCs and the factions they belong to ring hollow. When they don't have strong feelings about anything, or have strong feelings for poorly established reasons, the settled systems fall apart. It can never feel like an authentic place or tell stories that matter, because the characters within it don't come across like real people. This inhuman cant is even baked into the dialogue, most visibly when NPCs refer to the factions. This isn't how people talk, this isn't how they think. Factions is an extrinsic word. It's like saying I'm from the United States faction, which is absurd. You can't even use the excuse that it's future slang or whatever, because the only person who talks in space slang is this guy. I'm not kidding, it's just him. And being so rabidly apolitical, the opposite is achieved. Starfield is incredibly political, just not in the way sentient thumbs might think. Fucking pronouns! However, man-children who think games shouldn't be political and being more inclusive is what makes them political, they were already beyond help. No, what makes Starfield political is the refusal to take a stand or provide meaningful commentary outside of a blasé and half-hearted, both sides kind of bad, but not really, I guess. In doing so, it reveals its actual ideology, the one thing it truly believes in.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next products.
The settled systems are the safest, most sterile, and sexless sci-fi universe ever created. It is the Kendall Jenner Pepsi commercial of science fiction. It is terrified of a player having an opinion about it. It wants to hold up a mirror to the player and ask, what do you believe? But the mirror is covered in ads and insane loading screen tips. No, Bethesda, the one bank cannot be apolitical. Constellation can't claim to be apolitical when it is a literal stone throw away from the center of the United Colonies. Because that's not how politics work. That's not how systems work. That's not how people work. I keep arriving at doyless conclusions for every single choice the writers made, because those are the only ones that make sense. The United Colonies can never be portrayed too negatively, because Constellation is headquartered at New Atlantis, and you need to be there for main quest progression. If the UC were too sinister, that raised too many questions about Constellation. Can't have that. The Colony War happened to justify dropping copy-pasted dungeons everywhere. The capital city of an advanced spacefaring society capable of waging interstellar warfare is still endangered from alien fauna somehow, because this place needed to have some rustic twang for aesthetic reasons, I guess. This goes on and on. There is one quest in the game that best showcases the flaws inherent to this writing ethos, and why this game is so frustrating to talk about. Not only does it perfectly represent how being apolitical means being very political, but because there was some missed potential. First contact. It's a classic sci-fi setup. After almost 200 years of slower-than-light travel, a generational colony ship from old Earth arrives at its destination to find out they've been leapfrogged. FTL was invented while they were in transit, and the Paradise Planet they've claimed has already been colonized, in this case by a company that built a luxury resort. The colonists don't want to compromise. They filed for settlement rights centuries ago, and feel like they're owed this world in its entirety. The board doesn't want to compromise. They built a tiny resort on this planet, and they don't want to share a single acre. You're asked to play the role of diplomat and negotiate between the two groups. What this actually involves is telling the colonists to go fuck themselves. Your choices are buying them a grab drive and resources so they can find somewhere else to settle, selling them into indentured servitude, or killing them all. I hope I don't have to tell you why these being the only options is psychotic. Genuinely. What did Bethesda mean by this? You're never given the option to make a real compromise or side with the colonists, even though I feel like the comment about filing paperwork was the perfect setup for a dungeon raid. I thought the game wanted me to go to Earth and dig up their claim, which would have been a great level with lots of opportunities for storytelling. Then you could rub the document in the board's smug faces and give their shitty resort the finger. It would have been a very satisfying ending. In fact, I was so certain this was the intent, I thought my game bugged out and the option to do the dungeon raid was missing. But nope, you have to do whatever the board wants. What is the story saying? What is it about? If the intention was to be ironic that the descendants of the old world's ultra-wealthy are now subordinate to the ultra-wealthy of the settled systems, it falls completely flat.
I don't know, let him
Logic
kill the
comparison
tiger,
is
fuck
never
it.
examined, and moreover, this is the point when the colonists are normal people who have endured difficult...
I've got to wait like
conditions
6 minutes
for
here.
nearly 2 centuries.
So
Fucking
annoying.
them over
I
would
shouldn't
feel
pull
like
dogs. I always forget about the rabies.
being an asshole. If the intent was to be satire, that the board is so comically greedy that they won't share an entire planet they are barely using, that doesn't make any sense because the colonists also refuse to share. For no reason. My brothers in Christ, it is a planet! If the intention was to be depressing, that the board's greed is insurmountable and you can't resolve this quest in the way you might want, that doesn't work either, because that would be the only case of Starfield taking this tone in the entire game. If the quest intended you to feel down, you would have been able to express more sympathy towards the colonists. They would have been more reluctant and depressed if you sold them into servitude or they were forced to settle elsewhere. Instead, they're fine with either option that leaves them alive because Bethesda doesn't want the player to feel anything. Doing this quest feels like overdosing on crazy things. There was so much effort poured into custom assets, voice acting, and world building, but no one bothered to check that you could resolve the quest in a way that wasn't completely servile. This is what it means to be apolitical. Paradiso is there, it will always be there, and anyone who might possibly interfere with that can go kick rocks. Again, Starfield is nominally about choices, about exploration and agency and personhood, but you're only ever allowed to watch the story happen in front of you, no matter what that story is saying. You are told the solutions to problems, and then you go do them. The story of every quest doesn't treat you like an active participant, so the decisions you make at their conclusions are arbitrary options presented to you out of obligation, not a real choice that you made. Here's my ending to the Paradiso quest. But Bethesda says no. They care about their railroaded story and nothing else. You're essentially treated as the loading bar between in-engine cutscenes. If they're gonna hold your hand this much, why offer choices at all? When I say that Starfield doesn't respect the player's agency, this is what I mean. And without a sense of agency, the story's nominal purpose rings hollow. Without real convictions, the game world falls apart. If Starfield was truly invested in being a mirror to the player, they can't just be asked questions. Beliefs have to be explored, reinforced, or challenged with a clear voice. To be meaningful, exploration has to be dangerous, tactile, confronting. Seeing what's out there is only the first half. It's what we learn, what we bring back, and how it changes us that makes it feel substantial. And by design, the settled systems could never provide that. A more generous eye could write up First Contact as a whiff, one of the side quests that didn't get a ton of drafts and lacked another layer of polish. However, what's inexcusable is that the exact same sins of First Contact are found in every single faction quest. Why am I complaining about the factions when the game is more so about Constellation and the Starborn? Because the vast majority of custom assets, scripting, and gameplay hours are devoted to the faction content, and you are shepherded towards it with all the subtlety of a nuclear bomb. The main quest is barely longer than a single faction quest line, clocking in at around 8 hours. The factional stuff makes up the vast majority of the game's highest effort content. It's also where you'll make the choices the game considers important enough to receive ending slides, so they're fair game. By going over them in a little more detail, I want to illustrate that while each had potential, they all failed for the same reasons. Real quick, I will also offer some tepid praise here and say that at least Bethesda dropped the thing Skyrim and Fallout 4 did, where you always ended up as a faction leader. It never failed to feel incredibly contrived. Anyway, to continue the theme of cowardly, apolitical writing, I want to start with the Freestar Rangers. The quest line is a slurry of common Western tropes. Spurned veterans from the Big War want revenge on the government, so now they're up to some banditry, but they're secretly doing the bidding of a wealthy industrialist. This CEO, Ron Hope, hired these veterans to harass farmers off their land. He did this so he could turn their farms into mining pits with a special new anti-fertilizer that boosts mineral content in the soil somehow. Apparently, Hope Tech is on the ropes despite him being rich enough to have a seat in the government, so he had to start this insane and convoluted scheme to cut costs, which ends up seeming way more expensive, time-consuming, and risky than simply selling the anti-fertilizer as its own product. Did the Thieves Guild writer do this one too? Anyway, his stated motivation is that he wants to keep the money rolling in and keep protecting his workers in his company town. He has to cut costs, you see, otherwise he'll have to start firing people. Starfield is screaming at me that this dude is a slimy, lying dickhead, and for once we're in agreement. So I confront him with the evidence of his misdeeds, and after his pathetic attempts at a bribe fail, he decides the best course of action is to start shooting me. Me, a man who he knows just massacred an entire base full of hardened, vengeful, well-equipped colony war veterans. It goes as well as you'd expect. The game then tries to backpedal, being all, well, he did so much for Hopetown. No, he didn't, Sam. That was the whole fucking point. So why am I harping on about this? Well, because they were so close to sticking the landing. Imagine instead if Ron Hope realized he was backed against the wall and decided to surrender. He could have feigned regret, let himself be cuffed. And then he could have used his wealth and connections to avoid any sort of consequences whatsoever. That would have been an ending. Sure, you could construe this as the game not being reactive, but I think the storytelling benefits would have been worth it. That ending would have said so much more about who Ron Hope is, the flaws of the Freestar Collective, and the role of the Rangers within it. The quest could have ended with you sitting on the rock with your fellow Rangers, sipping a beer and feeling a little shitty. But at least you would have felt something. As I've established, though, that wasn't an option. The player can't be confronted with anything that feels too real or, God forbid, political, so the actual ending of the quest line is absurd nonsense. The whole quest lets you make flavorful choices about what kind of lawman you want to be, and it comments on some of the role-playing you did along the way. And then the story eats shit on the finishing line. This is the problem with the best quest line of the game, UC Vanguard. I was being a little reductive when I said it boils down to, hey, remember aliens, but I still stand by that. Regardless, I think this one's competent. It dives into the history of the UC and the settled systems, planting plenty of foreshadowing with fun payoffs later. It has decent quest variety and some of the game's more memorable characters. It even has a final mission with some real energy to it. It's still riddled with Bethesda writing tropes. The character motivations and plotting are pretty thin, flat, or nonsensical, but at least it was dumb, fun, sci-fi schlock. Just a couple issues. Vivictus being the one behind all the Terramorph attacks is very silly. He's so obviously villainous, I thought the game was setting him up as a red herring. The real twist is that it was that straightforward. So I ask, what if it wasn't him? What if it was President Lady? By changing some character motivations and a couple of plot details around, you could tell a much more meaningful story than insane megalomaniac does a terrorism. If it was President Lady, Bethesda could have shown that the United Colonies aren't improving because the flawed authoritarian system the nation is built upon can only produce flawed authoritarian leaders. President Lady might have wanted to further centralize and control the United Colonies, so she orchestrated terrifying, unpredictable attacks to justify increasing the power of her state security apparatuses. She has the perfect scapegoat in Vivictus, and the player would have no reason to believe him if he insisted on his innocence. She could have played this off exactly how she does in the real story, where she sees him as a relic of a darker time for the UC and executes him for real this time, her hands clean of wrongdoing. Imagine how fucking cold it would have been if she confessed to being the real mastermind at the end. Enjoy your citizenship, live with the consequences. That would have been an awesome twist. Instead, the attacks were orchestrated by a vengeful, sociopathic war criminal mastermind from a secret prison cell because that's more comfortable and less real to the player than having to reconcile that they might have been working for the bad guys. Starfield doing service guaranteed citizenship, but not engaging with what that means is monstrously gross. It's like they wanted to plop down a pop sci-fi reference and didn't stop to think about how that affected world building. Like they took Starship Troopers at face value. It's important to note here that this isn't me wanting more depressing questline resolutions because that's more realistic or political or whatever. Hell no. These quests could have been written in ways where the player can avoid these bad outcomes by rewarding critical thinking and clever choices. That way, if you put in the work and pay attention, you'll feel like you, the player, accomplished a goal or made a meaningful choice. Then, the stories can actually be about something and be fun, instead of mindlessly following a quest marker to the next quick hit of dopamine. As it stands, the Vanguard quest line ends with, "Congratulations, you're such a good boy, you get Suffrage Prime." Ugh. The SysDef and Crimson Fleet quest line does have some reactivity, but this one's broken on a more fundamental level. First things first, the hook for this quest is deranged moon logic. If you do a naughty and get caught, Dollar Store Cisco shanghais you, a random criminal, into his incredibly sensitive undercover operation to take down the Crimson Fleet, the largest and most well-organized pirate mafia in the settled systems. It doesn't matter what you were arrested for. You could have been picking up litter or being an actual pirate, but no matter what, you're the one for the job. You can get this quest through the Vanguard quest line, but I'm betting this is how most players encountered it. In any case, you join the Crimson Fleet. They're a fun, scrappy group with some real camaraderie, and there's more to them than they let on. Sorry, that was a blatant lie. No, they're irritating edgelords who are trying way too hard to be badass. Jazz was alright, I guess. I'm getting ahead of myself. The whole point of this quest is to ingratiate yourself with the Crimson Fleet while collecting, or failing to collect, evidence for SysDef. This means getting to know the Crimson Fleet captains, and I think I would rather rip my fingernails off with rusty wire strippers than be around any of them for a second longer than I absolutely have to. They're the worst. They're every amateur writer's idea of badasses. Violent, hyper-aggressive psychopaths who swagger around with unearned arrogance and kill each other over scraps. They're not badasses, they're pathetic. Every attempt to characterize them otherwise falls flat. They don't think or act like real people. Like, take Rokov. He got kicked out of the Crimson Fleet, an organization that normally kills you for leaving, and managed to become the captain of a luxury cruise liner. And now he wants to flush a steady, well-paying job in conditions like these down the drain so he can go back to being a scuzzy loser in a decrepit fuck barn? What? The quest line expects you to build rapport with these people. If you side with the Crimson Fleet, they all show up at the end, smugging about the good old days and lending a hand. If you betray them, you gotta be the one to put them down. That'd be a great way to end the quest if I cared about them, or they believed in anything. At the very least, this is the one quest with any real reactivity to it. Betraying the Crimson Fleet means the key will be emptied or destroyed, an actual consequence, because there was a dense cluster of vendors that you could sell your loot to. But that's as far as it goes. The bigger problem is that there's no real player agency in this quest. The SysDef quest line is huge and sprawling, loaded with NPCs, scripted scenarios, and one of my favorite levels in the game. But since Starfield is so terrified you'll miss it, it shreds its own verisimilitude to pieces to ensure that you won't. There's an opportunity here to do something interesting. If you're a dedicated space cop, the quest could be over the instant you dock to the key. Even at lower levels, you can kill every single pirate inside, including Delgado, without too much trouble. Quest over. But that would mean not seeing all the content, missing out on Crix's legacy, and all the credits it contains. And that would be awesome. That'd be real, meaningful agency. Whether out of impatience or bloodthirst, you could have screwed yourself out of tons of content. Sure, that sucked the first time, but isn't this game meant to be replayed? What happens if the next time through, you go along with it? That'd be an incredible realization. On that note, Akande tells you to avoid hurting innocent people while you're undercover, except you're never put in danger of actually doing so. Non-lethal options are plentiful, easy, and clearly signposted. You're never confronted with a tough choice that might endanger the mission, or ever pressed on who you are or why you want to join the Crimson Fleet. At least Akande will fire you if you get too into the role. That's nice, but you can still finish the rest of the quest line with the Crimson Fleet, so you don't miss out on doing Crix's legacy. As it is, even if you side with SysDef and surrender Crix's legacy like a nerd, you still get the exact same amount of credits as if you sided with the pirates. Because God forbid something of consequence happens. Whichever side you choose, the game does its best to make sure you don't feel anything. If you slaughtered the Crimson Fleet, who cares? Because they sucked. If you betrayed SysDef, who cares? Because they're vaguely authoritarian jerks who shanghaied you into this mess in the first place for insane reasons. Killing them doesn't even add bounty to the United Colonies. Awful. If I sound frustrated, the next faction is so much
aggro.
The first contact made me feel like I was downing fistfuls of crazy pills. The Ryujin Industries quest line made me feel like I was mainlining weapons-grade PCP. The plot is pretty simple. Climb the corporate ladder, go from getting coffee to performing industrial espionage. As a corporate operative, you're tasked with infiltrating various companies, stealing, planting evidence, even breaking into Ryujin itself to ferret out a mole. The NPCs are playing every cyberpunk trope to the hilt with snide relish, engaging in betrayals, sabotage, and shady deals at every step of the way. That sounds like fun, and it can be at points. However, the writing for this quest is brain damage levels of baffling, because the game only lets you be a Ryujin stooge, a mercenary out for the paycheck, or a Boy Scout, impotently wagging your finger at all the vile shit going down. You can betray several characters as you climb the corporate ladder, but you can never betray Ryujin itself. Even when it's revealed the product they want you to steal back from a rival corp is a mind control device. Ryujin developed a mind control device, called it Project Dominion, then planned to use it to become the most powerful entity in the settled systems. They're going to sell both the device itself and a secondary device that shields you from its effects, making anyone too poor to afford either essentially mind slaves. And then Starfield has the balls to try and frame Ryujin as the lesser evil just because they're not speedrunning human trials? Are you for real? That's where the line gets drawn? I feel like I'm being pranked.
Corporate culture may have its ugly side, but that doesn't mean we've lost our humanity.
This has to be a joke, right? Is this a jab at Elon Musk and his monkey murdering machine? There's no way you're supposed to take this at face value. Except I think you are, because you're never allowed to express the opinion, hey, this is super fucked up, and Ryujin needs to be burned to the ground. At the very most, you can convince the other board members to shelve the mind control device. That's it. Hell, right before the questline ends, you can rat on a rival corp to SSNN for stealing this technology, but you can't also choose to tattle on Ryujin, even though you have ample evidence of what they're up to. Are you supposed to feel like a monster at the end of this questline? I'll never know because the questline bugged out at the very end and I couldn't finish it. I had to look up what happens instead because fuck doing this insane quest ever again. It's been said that you have to meet Bethesda games halfway, that they're sandboxes. You have to use your imagination, make your own fun, and commit to your roleplay to get the most out of them. That you can be whoever you want within these massive fictional worlds. I disagree. This is my response to that, because this is as much freedom as Bethesda will allow. This is the most role-playing the Ryujin questline will actually tolerate. It's petty and juvenile and stupid, but pretending the game's letting you do something vulgar and rebellious is as close you can get to meaningfully expressing yourself. If the Ryujin questline is intended as satire, then so is Gallagher. Vaguely placating the player's sensibilities by trying to frame Ryujin as the lesser evil when they were plotting to build a mind control device shows where the concern actually lay. Bethesda wanted to have a fun, over-the-top cyberpunk questline about backstabbing corporate espionage and didn't want the player to feel too bad doing it. There was no thought given to what the player might think about the actual text of the story or how they might want to affect it. I can't read this as satire. It's too dumb. This is why I said I didn't just want depressing endings. What I want is more agency within a real story that has something to say. The good ending to this quest, betraying Ryujin and quitting, is right there, but it's not a choice you can make. Now hold on, Gun, I can hear you saying. Why are you whining about factions and politics and agency and stuff when the main quest is more about the big ideas? Well, you already know my feelings on that, but I should address its issues anyway, because, like I said, the entire thrust of the narrative, becoming Starborn, breaks everything else.
Feel free to browse.
The first and most important thing the story says is, don't worry,
Farewell.
this universe exists to cater to you. You're given a ship for no good reason because Barrett's such a wacky guy. Then you do the tutorial and are granted membership in gentrified Starfleet. The artifacts are nebulous nothing burgers, and the characters leap to insane conclusions about what they are and what they might do. We'll talk more about the characters in a second, but for now, it's made clear that even though this is your first day, you're the one running the show. It's frustrating that modern Bethesda games are so desperate to rush you into power fantasy where you're the center of attention and the only character that matters. It foils any attempt to immerse yourself in the fiction because it feels like the universe is bending itself backwards to make you the hero. This might also just be a personal thing, but I feel like the game is patronizing me. That if it's not putting me front and center from the word go, my fragile ego won't be able to take it, and my attention will waver. The game doesn't trust its own storytelling or mechanics to hook you, so it embarks upon a series of contrivances to make you feel like the most important person ever. That's what the opening hour of Starfield is telling me. That it doesn't trust my agency, that it doesn't have confidence in itself, and its universe exists to make me feel like protagonist man with magic space powers. Providing a power fantasy like that is what video games can excel at, but starting you off at the top leaves nowhere for the story to go. Mechanically, you might become more powerful, but narratively, the story is over after the tutorial. And that's the first hour. The deeper issue with the main quest being about gathering artifacts is that the mystery surrounding them is surface level. What are they made of? Who made them? What are they for? The characters discuss these questions and talk about how exciting it is to be pushing the boundaries of our scientific understanding, but structuring your quest this way immediately conveys to the player that the artifacts are nothing more than MacGuffins. Constellation is supposed to be an organization that explores and discovers, but what you actually do is go where the eye says and then get the artifact that is always there. If it wasn't for the eye, the main quest would be impossible to complete. There is no exploration in going to a place to find a thing, finding the thing, then repeating the process. Starfield's main quest was a brutal victim of and then storytelling, the flattest and least engaging way to tell a story imaginable. You find an artifact, and then you find another, and then you find another, and then you buy one, and then you get another, and then the Starborn attack, and then you go find more artifacts, then you build the armor layer, then you become Starborn. The purpose of the main quest is not to explore the final frontier or push scientific boundaries, but to show off points of interest in the settled systems and urge you towards the faction quests. It takes you to different places, and you encounter some obstacles along the way, but the story is only ever get the artifacts. The Starborn are supposed to be a mid-game twist, a mysterious new threat that shakes up the status quo. But think about it. What does their arrival actually change? If you've been playing the game in the way Bethesda intended and biting the quest hooks like they clearly want you to, the Starborn are complete pushovers. They fight you like every other enemy in the game, bark out generic villain dialogue, and then die like bitches. And then the Hunter kills one of your companions. This is supposed to ramp up the stakes and make the main quest feel more personal, but it comes off as predictable, arbitrary, and desperate. As soon as they had you help out your friends on the eye, I knew someone was getting murked. This isn't a consequence of your decisions or your pursuit of the artifacts, it's a naked grab for emotional investment. And again, it doesn't change the
Goddess,
story, it just
yes.
subtracts a character. Still gotta go find those artifacts, bucko, so get on it. The hunter is apparently ruthless enough to attack Constellation to get the artifacts, but he never does so again for the rest of the game, nor does he stop you from trying to acquire more. At the end of the game, you can even convince him to abandon his pursuit with the Radiant Dialogue minigame. I love the idea of being able to talk down the main villains of a game, but this feels unearned. There was no indication before this that the hunter or the emissary were ever going to desist in their quest. They talk about novelty amidst the multiverse being a factor, but it's empty cruft because that relies on external factors you have no control over. You don't convince the Starborn that their point of view is wrong or that you deserve the artifacts. You're attempting to convince them that they're bored and should stop. And it works. The Starborn's motivations are so nebulous and ill-defined that subverting them feels less like convincing them of something and more like you caught them while their brains were rebooting. Once again, reaching a Doyless conclusion, I feel like the speech option was there to have a speech option, not because it's an important part of the story being told. So you can kill them instead, and they die in seconds, which sucks. The level of threat the Starborn pose is never explored because they're as powerful as the story needs them to be at any given moment. Defeating them doesn't feel earned, it just feels like the game is finally allowing you to win. And then you become Starborn. Again, it's interesting that they contextualize New Game Plus as part of the main quest, but issues arise once you start thinking about it. Having your story being about the multiverse to facilitate perpetual play is fine, but it's impossible to meaningfully explore the concept of alternate universes within the scope of a Bethesda game, especially one as massive as Starfield. Rewarding the player for doing New Game Plus again and again and again forces the player to acknowledge that each alternate universe only has cosmetic differences. Doing so directly guides them towards the conclusion that the game wants them to keep playing forever, but nothing will change and no decision will matter. So why bother? Actually, hasn't the whole game been about how becoming Starborn makes you cold, unfeeling, and patronizing? Is that the intention? With how much emphasis the narrative puts on your human connections, I don't think that was the case. The main quest is about becoming an immensely powerful being that is the center of the universe, except that's just the default premise of a Bethesda RPG. All the implied grandeur in multiverse stuff doesn't convince me this was a story worth telling. It engages with a writing trope that I personally despise and can be found across countless science fiction and fantasy stories. The avalanche of proper nouns. In Starfield, you have to defeat the Starborn to get the artifacts, build the armor layer to reach Unity. This isn't inherently bad writing or anything. Fictional universes need their own constructed concepts and interior logic to function. The issue is that writers tend to hit the shift key when they want their story to feel more lofty and important without laying the groundwork to earn that grandeur. By talking up these proper nouns in hushed, wistful tones, they're trying to get the audience to care about their story faster. How can you not care about the thing? It's the thing. It wasn't enough that Earth was destroyed, it also had to be a big, dramatic, binary choice. This feels incredibly jarring in Starfield. The art direction is screaming hard science fiction, a genre where science is treated with enthusiasm and respect, while the story feels like a generic fantasy novel about hunting down magical MacGuffins, and the gameplay is trying to be Fallout 4, it just confuses things even further. The actual grandeur doesn't have room to exist within this tangled mess of directions. All the proper nouns and production value in the world can't make following a quest marker for some multiverse MacGuffins feel like real exploration. If the intention is that it's not the big ideas that matter, it's humanity itself, the people we meet and the connections we form, Starfield also falls flat in its face. As I discussed in both the Skyrim and Mass Effect videos, sometimes the story's characters, even if they're a vehicle for a subpar plot, can be engaging enough to keep a narrative afloat. This is why I consider characters to be the most important component of a story. If there's no one to latch onto, identify with, or care about, your entire narrative is dead in the water. I don't care what happens to these people are the 8 deadly words, as coined by sci-fi critic Dorothy J. Haight, and they apply to Starfield in spades. The game at least tries. They put in the work to give the main companions and supporting cast personalities, backstories, and character arcs. They talk differently, their quests are built around core themes, and they're intended to give deeper insight into the 3 primary factions. This is how companions in RPGs should be written. However, by structuring the main quest around Constellation, an organization designed to be as agreeable as possible, they don't feel distinct outside their character concept, and can't develop past it. Although there are 5 companion characters, they're all reduced to different flavors of Constellation. Sarah's the leader, Sam's a space cowboy, Barrett holds up sporks, Andresia's a smuggler, and Vasco's your true neutral robot. Although most of them are intended to highlight the different factions in the settled systems, they're a part of Constellation, an apolitical organization that the player must always feel welcome at, so they don't have any strong feelings about anything. The intention seems to be that they're trying to be Starfleet in a galaxy that doesn't care about exploration. Instead, this comes off as them being smugly callous towards all the problems in the settled systems. Sarah's a veteran of the colony war and gets sad about it, but she doesn't have any strong feelings about the United Colonies beyond bureaucracy bad, I guess. Sam is a descendant of the founder of the Freestar Collective, but doesn't have any thoughts about that outside his daddy issues. Barrett lost his husband in the colony war, but doesn't have any strong feelings about the UC, the Freestar Collective, or the war itself. He's part of the reclusive House Rune, but doesn't have anything to say about it. You can't even ask her questions about her beliefs because there aren't any answers. Not in a hand-wavy, faith doesn't have concrete answers kind of way, but in the it's just a wacky space cult, bro, don't think about it kind of way. She would have been the perfect insight into the history, culture, and beliefs of House Faroon, but she doesn't have anything to say about them that you can't infer from their mural in the Vanguard hallway. Do you know why the Zealots use lots of disabling weapons? It's because their population is plummeting, so they're kidnapping and enslaving the people of the settled systems to bring back to their home planet. You didn't know that because I made it up. It's such an obvious conclusion to reach that makes them even more sinister and interesting, but it was never even hypothesized within the game. I'm left with the impression that confirming a detail that vile would have made the player feel something, so it got the axe. Guess they use more disabling guns because they're more sci-fi or whatever. Sorry to harp on about Andrasia and House Faroon so much. She feels like the least Constellation-y character, so I thought they were going to take her in interesting directions and realize the potential RPG companions can provide. Instead, she was betrayed by her people for vague reasons and feels whatever about it. How are we supposed to care about any of these people? They're all written to be nice and charming in their own ways, but nothing besides that. They don't feel like real people who have inner lives, they feel like Marvel characters. On that note, Starfield even feels like an MCU entry, because the setting and the characters that fill it are so sexless and unhorny that it's like the galaxy is populated exclusively by monastic robots. Just one more way Bethesda sanded down their game to be as safe and inoffensive as possible. As a result, the concessions to market expectations for romance in RPGs comes off as exactly that. Strange and obligatory. The only person who's allowed to be sexual in Starfield is the player and their chosen NPC. This means
No. Until the modders get a hold of it. Maybe in your sexless life, maybe in your incel life that doesn't have sex, but you know, in the real world, no, the modders have added sex to Starfield and made it much better, trust me.
Your skill has increased.
That is ridiculous.
But beyond the obvious doyalist reasons for this choice, it has a much more damning problem. None of the characters feel real as a result. Since the companions are the only 4 characters in the settled systems that are allowed to be sexual, and only then at the player's behest, it's one more strange flaw to add to the pile of other reasons they don't feel like human beings. The tragedy here is that there was clearly a titanic level of effort involved in creating them. They have thousands of lines, they're reactive to story beats, they comment on specific locations, and discuss quest conclusions with you. But since they were all confined by Starfield's sterile writing ethos, they are devoid of life. All of the talented performances were wasted. Like I said, they even got me with Sarah at the memorial. However, even when she died, the most the game could get out of me was an... Oh no! Anyway, this is perhaps the most subjective part of what is already a very subjective video, but I cannot be asked to care about these characters. Maybe I'm just a callous asshole. If you played the game, did you find them engaging? I don't know. In comparison, Sela isn't even the best character in the Wrath of the Righteous, but I have more to say about her than I do about any character in the entirety of Starfield. And this goes beyond the companions. I only focused on them because they're so central to the narrative. There are a handful of interesting side characters in Starfield, some that are fun to hate and some that feel like real people, but they are few and far between. None of them are interesting enough to make the rest of the game worth experiencing. When broken down into its constituent elements, Starfield's story doesn't work. When viewed as a whole, it's even worse. For all its talk about exploration, the multiverse, choices, consequences, and human connection, I never believed a word of it. In being so non-confrontational and taking whatever path would make the player feel the most okay about everything, the settled systems were broken beyond repair. The faction quests lacking any meaningful choices or resolutions robbed the setting of texture and depth. The primary characters being slightly different flavors of Constellation robs the setting of vibrancy and humanity. Reducing the story of humans reaching the center of the multiverse down to a series of linear fetch quests interconnected with lifeless and then writing so the game can concoct a diegetic reason for New Game Plus was a remarkably awful choice. Doing so is clearly telegraphing that the Hunter, the avatar of disengaged, doyless nihilism, treating this game like a toy and not a work of art, is ultimately correct. You know, this dude. The bad guy. You even get his armor if you do New Game plus 10, so that means this was intentional. This is neither commentary nor irony. This is the game telling you to treat it like a solipsistic time waster in the same breath it wants to say it's deep and meaningful.
So dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb! The most natural, meaningful conclusion of the story, rejecting unity to make the most out of the one life you have, is at odds with the obviously intended conclusion of embracing it. These two options are not given the same narrative or mechanical weight. Even if you do reject it, you're allowed to go back whenever you want, which means that there's only one real option. Rejecting unity isn't embracing your humanity and mortality, you're just kicking the apotheosis can down the road a little. You can turn the game off after rejecting unity, but nothing else in the game is designed with that intention in mind. The only thing Starfield says with conviction is keep playing forever. This might be one of the biggest stories ever told.
The artifact gave the scientists a greater understanding of time and space.
I acknowledge that I'm a hypercritical asshole when it comes to video game writing.
Hypocritical.
And that department is different than ours. However, I never expected Bethesda to cater their $100 million AAA product specifically to snobs like me, because that's ridiculous. So why am I even bitching about this? Why am I complaining about Starfield's writing if it was intended as a generic space adventure with a generic setting and a generic repeatable story? What did I expect? Well, I try to look at games holistically because that's how they work. Story, gameplay, art direction, each of them affects the other. You must understand this. Even if one aspect of game development isn't a priority, it still has an effect on the stuff that is. If the writing had been good, or at the very least competent, everything else about Starfield would have been elevated. What's particularly frustrating is that, like I said, sometimes you do get glimpses of something amazing. But then it crushes them under mountains of bad, or simply meh. Instead of enhancing the game, Starfield's writing hits the point of story collapse an hour into the game. Questions pile up thick and fast until you hit a point where something happens that's so dumb you take a step back and realize everything is broken. This is what I mean when I say Starfield doesn't respect your intelligence. It's so terrified of offering an opinion it doesn't spend any time justifying itself. The world building itself is focused on player retention, yet it melts under scrutiny because that's all it cares about. In comparison, Vardenfell is a volcanic alien hellhole full of racist elf wizards, but it feels so much more like a real place because considerable thought was put into how people would live there and what their society would look like. You can get immersed. If you're not invested in the settled systems and its stories, everything about Starfield is lessened. Instead, you have to lean on the gameplay to carry the experience, and, oh boy. Even if you approach Starfield as a game that you can turn your brain off with, it fails on pretty much every level. Interacting with Starfield's gameplay systems is an endlessly confounding and painful process. I'll remind you of the Field of Rights analogy because it's just so accurate. Nothing about Starfield's gameplay works because in its maximalist aim to do everything and be everything, it does nothing well. Whenever I'm enjoying something about Starfield, another gameplay design philosophy fucking jumps me out of nowhere and takes my lunch money. The end result is a game that is actively hostile to its own design directives because it gets less fun the more you play it and learn how it works. The Bethesda RPG is something of a genre unto itself, and like I said in the intro, it's so close to being something incredible that they keep suckering us in. After all, when the formula works, it results in some of the best games of all time. The basic premise is that you explore an open world, find problems, overcome them, and grow stronger, increasing your character's capabilities, wealth, and your own mastery of the game's system. In doing so, you learn more about the story, you encounter more complex and challenging problems, while finding more interesting places to explore that uncover even more narrative. Over the years, Bethesda has experimented with tweaking it to achieve different goals. As they become one of the largest and most profitable AAA studios in the industry, this translates into simplifying their gameplay mechanics until they take no mental effort to engage with, out of sheer mortal terror that one of their customers might have to think about what an attribute point is. This is ridiculous for reasons I've already covered. What makes Starfield's take on the Bethesda RPG interesting and incredibly flawed is that it's a blend of previous titles and their own interpretations of that formula. More than any other game, Starfield is intended to feel and play like Fallout 4. Like Fallout 4, it pursues the goal of perpetual play. Just like the storytelling, none of the gameplay systems are very complex, nothing is challenging, nothing confronts the player or makes them think. You engage with the core gameplay loop, explore, kill, loot, explore, until you're too tired to continue. It is a much more streamlined version of the classic dungeon crawl experience, which they nearly perfected with Daggerfall back in '96. In Daggerfall, there are a handful of handcrafted locations with important characters and quest givers scattered around an enormous yet empty map. They direct the player towards randomly generated dungeons.
Aggro.
By overcoming the challenges therein, you loot the place down to the bedrock. You head back to town, sell your ill-gotten gains, upgrade your gear, and grow more powerful. With Starfield having procedurally generated planets interspersed by loading screens, radiant quests, and some large handcrafted locations crammed with named NPCs, the game feels remarkably similar to Daggerfall. You are often pointed to a location where there'll be some bandits among four flavors, you shoot them, you loot them, you fly back home. What it's lacking is Daggerfall's challenge.
Aggro.
On top of this, Starfield also takes a stab at being an honest-to-God role-playing game like Obsidian's New Vegas, with focus on world building, places, characters, consequences. It has a sprawling skill tree, more varied quest types, and avenues for player agency and expression. You might be seeing the problem. These three types of games are not inherently incompatible, but they are difficult to cohere. They have different structures, different priorities, and reward engaging with the game differently. Personally, I find the problems lie with the perpetual play style of game design, the Fallout 4 style. Like its predecessor, Starfield treats you like an annoying toddler that needs an iPad, giving you an avalanche of tiny dopamine hits to keep you playing. Whenever I get a whiff of grinding that a game isn't respecting my time, I drop it like a hot rock. If a game is intended to be played over many, many hours, it must, by necessity, tease out its systems, its progression, its rewards, and any story it might have over the longest possible stretch of time. The only conclusion I can come to is that it's not worth it. I can understand and appreciate why MMOs and ARPGs are built like this. They can serve as fantastic social spaces, but why a single-player RPG? It's been said by myself and countless others before me that Bethesda is terrified of telling its players no, because they think they're interfering with that fantasy of going anywhere and doing anything by doing so. But this has the opposite effect. By telling me I can go anywhere and do anything, the actual scope of what I can do is diminished by raw necessity. Providing meaningful content for every kind of gameplay style is impossible on such a massive scale. Therefore, the only recourse, if you're so scared of saying no, is to do it all badly by cramming everything into this ill-fitting ARPG model. More damningly is that this core design directive means Bethesda can't also tell its players yes. They can't reward players for lateral thinking, making a dedicated build, or learning the game's systems. It can't establish replay value by pathing out a reactive narrative or meaningful quest lines, which means that their stories have to be empty, vapid, and without consequence by design feeding. Therefore, without any form of pushback, there's no way for the game to provide real stakes or a sense of achievement. There's only the grind. It's not that I'm impatient either. Some of my favorite games are ones that take a long time to get going in terms of the player's power arc. But in those games, reaching the end of that arc feels like a real reward. In Starfield, it feels like the game is arbitrarily dropping roadblocks in my way to keep me from making the rest of the grind too easy. Let me explain. Early in my first playthrough, I got jumped in a high-level system by a squadron of spacer ships. I had to use asteroids for cover as I picked off the weaker ones until I could take a crack at the big one. It was a huge ship, clearly outclassing me. I was almost blown up myself, but after burning through my repair kits, I was able to disable and board it. A brutal CQC fight ensued. They drained most of my ammo and the health packs I'd been saving up for hours, but I managed to do it. The ship was mine. I went up to the pilot seat to claim my prize. Nope. I wasn't allowed to fly it because I needed to invest some arbitrary skill points first. Starfield didn't want to tell me yes. It doesn't even really let you sell the captured ships you can fly. After commandeering a ship, you have to register it for a huge percentage of its total value before you're allowed to sell it. This means you can make more money selling a handful of guns than you can being a badass space pro. This is also why all the vendors have so few credits between them, to discourage the player from selling all their loot at once. The loot that the game is built around procuring. Credits are so useful for everything in Starfield that it doesn't want you to acquire them too quickly. So instead, you have to do the settled system shuffle, going from planet to planet to planet, wasting your time because you dare to engage with the gameplay systems as they were designed. Otherwise, it'd break the progression curve. Even if you do save up a bunch of credits, the game doesn't allow you to spend them in the ways that you want. I love the shipbuilding system, but I couldn't engage with it until I ground out more skill points and named challenges by installing and uninstalling random bits. Because if I didn't have to do that, that'd be another way to break the ship combat. By the time you reach the end of the intended progression curve, where you can build or fly the most powerful ships, nothing you do with them will feel like an accomplishment. You don't get to enjoy having an awesome spaceship because using it feels like bullying now. You'd mastered the ship combat hours ago. This is just the game patting you on the head for spending so much time grinding. The game systems are so simple, the game has to take away functionality to turn them into skills. It doesn't feel like getting better at anything, you're just being allowed to suck less. Attempting to integrate actual RPG mechanics into this Fallout 4 style game design philosophy is functionally impossible because the game does not and cannot have any investment in them. It wants you to do all of the content forever, so it can't structure itself around character specialization, narrative decisions, or systems mastery. But why am I complaining about that when Starfield was explicitly designed as an action RPG? Because the action isn't fun. Look, I'd be lying if I said that the gunplay isn't at least decent. That's not the problem. The problem is that there is nothing else. Guns, ballistics in particular, are so powerful, numerous, and easy to use that using anything else is pointless. There are so many other skills focused on combat, and they're all ancillary. Investing into martial arts or melee weapons isn't adhering to a character concept, it's just being a contrarian. I started this game on its highest difficulty setting, very hard, and I never turned it off. The worst it got was annoying. At the beginning, when I found the right weapons and faced the right enemies, the game felt pretty good. The weapons felt powerful, and gormlessly standing out in the open got me killed. This didn't last long. Once I got 5 or 6 levels, Starfield became incredibly easy. I didn't even invest into stealth until I was level 30 or so because it wasn't necessary. The ammo system is a speed bump. You're so flush with ammo a few hours in that you'll never need to worry about it again, even when you do hit the occasional bullet sponge. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that I'm bragging or engaging in get-good asshattery. Truth be told, I'm very, very bad at video games. However, I still enjoy playing games on harder difficulties, because that should force me to use all the tools at my disposal. The issue is that Starfield doesn't have or need tools beyond shoot the bad men until they fall down. It's serviceable, but that's all it ever is. Once you learn that guns go blam and jetpacks go whoosh, you've mastered Starfield's combat. The only thing magic space powers do is make the game even easier. The game is so large and action-focused that combat needed depth, complexity, challenge, or variety to remain engaging. There's no other way to keep such a titanic game interesting over its intended lifespan. Instead, for the overwhelming majority of your time with Starfield, the core gameplay loop, the action in your action RPG, is mindless, repetitive mush. Your 5th hour with the game looks identical to the 50th. The only real difference between very easy and very hard is how much ammo you use. Better loot and flat skill increases don't make you better at the game, they just make your numbers go up. Without anything deeper to learn about the combat system, there's no reward for engaging with it. No challenges, no discoveries, no twists or shakeups. I've seen people trying to play this game like Dishonored, but to that I offer this classic bit. Dancing around like this is wasting your time. It's cool you can do this, of course, but it's never necessary, nor is it encouraged. It's only possible at all because of borked AI and stealth mechanics. If the game was intended to play like this, it would be the most optimal way to play the game. Instead, when the game is this simple,